Oh, hi, I didn't see you there. It's Aston with MOTO2N, the mobile repair service for Japanese motorcycles and all kinds of scooters serving Colorado's Front Range since 2016. Today I'm working on my ZX7R that needs nothing. I'm just playing with it. The plan is to take it for a ride once the engine's warm enough for it to run right, and that always takes a second with these old bikes. You have to warm them up. It's about 40 degrees in the garage. I'm going to try starting this bike anyway and taking it for a ride. But first, the first step is to get the fucking thing started. So I turn the gas on, turn the choke on, make sure the battery is fully charged and in good shape. I keep my batteries on trickle chargers whenever I'm not riding my bikes. That's why the seats are pulled off. Then I turn the key, and putting it in first gear helps too because that forces the fuel pump to work. And then I hit the button with the clutch pulled and see what happens. So the first attempt, it runs for a second and dies. That's pretty normal. The second attempt, it does the same thing. That's also normal. This is just how it is whenever it's under about 45 degrees in the garage. On the third attempt, it finally catches, and I just need to wait for it to warm up enough for me to be able to use the throttle. I'll try testing it here in a second or two. In the meantime, though, let's talk a little ZX7R history, racing and otherwise. Doug Chandler campaigned the P Model ZX7R to AMA championships with Team Muzzy in 1996 and 1997. Previous models of the ZX7R were raced to championship wins in World Superbike throughout the 1990s. One of my favorite racers, Anthony Gobert, also raced a P Model ZX7R before blowing his life up with drugs and alcohol. Rest in peace, Go Show. I've heard the ZX7R described as raw and visceral to ride, and I'd agree with that. There are no rider aids, no electronic nannies, no ABS, no cruise control. Gas gauge? That's funny. If you can't figure out how to use an odometer, that's just tough shit. There's no room for your cell phone mount on the bars. Cell phones barely even existed when this bike was released. At the end of the day, it's just a big-ass motorcycle with sticky tires and about 100 horsing powers worth of lime green punk rock attitude. Unlike a modern 600, the old 7 has enough mid-range power to pull itself to a 12,500 RPM redline starting at 4,000-ish in traffic, which makes it a lot more streetable than its absolutely atrocious riding position would otherwise indicate. The ZX7R is a throwback to a time when bikes were becoming what they would eventually be. It was almost immediately outclassed by the 1996 GSXR 750 SRAD, which would go on to win its fair share of championships under another talented Aussie rider, the winningest rider in AMA history if I'm not mistaken, one Matt Mladen. New, completely redesigned sport bikes were coming out every other year in the 1990s and early 2000s. By the time the P model ended its run in 2002, it had already been outclassed by any number of other machines, including Yamaha's R1 and Honda's CBR 929 and 954RR bikes. Kawasaki kept selling the ZX7R because people kept buying them. Crappy riding position aside, it was one of the prettiest bikes on the showroom floor, and that's a huge part of why the ZX7R has become a highly desirable cult classic motorcycle to own and ride in the 2020s. It's a huge flex to be able to keep one of these older, nostalgic, carbureted motorcycles in good running condition, and to take it on long rides more or less frequently has been a privilege for the past couple of years. A huge part of owning these old sport bikes involves riding them regularly, which is really hard when it gets too cold to ride them outside. I consider it too cold to ride once it starts dropping under about 60 degrees here in Colorado. Your mileage may vary. Some people will get out there and ride their motorcycles and be happy to do it even when it's 35, 40 degrees outside. I'm not one of those people. I'm very much a fair weather rider. If it's not nice outside, then I don't want to ride. However, I do take my bikes on what are called maintenance rides even during the winter. So during January and February, I can always find a day when it's going to be over about 40 degrees outside and there's very little snow. Most of the snow melts here in Colorado. This is not the Midwest. It doesn't stick around. So as long as the streets are dry and it's over about 40 degrees, then I can take this bike and my other bikes for a ride just to keep the fluids moving through them, get them all the way up to temperature so that it burns off all the condensation inside the engine. That's very important. I hardly ever just start these bikes and let them run in the garage. That's not something that I do. That does not get them all the way up to temp. So yeah, I don't have an action cam, so I can't take you along for the ride with me or anything. But this is just me putting the seats back on the bike. They snap on nicely. There's actually a lot of room underneath the passenger seat to store things like your cell phone. You could even fit a light base layer in there if the temperatures are going to change throughout your ride. You could throw your gloves in there, a pair of sunglasses, your wallet. Believe it or not, quite a few things will fit inside that trunk underneath the passenger seat. Although I am pretty into wearing all of my gear all the time, because this is just a maintenance ride, I'm only wearing a helmet, boots. I'm not even wearing boots. Apparently I'm just wearing a pair of Jordan 1s. How about that? But typically I'd wear boots, a pair of moto jeans, a leather jacket, gloves, and a helmet. But because this is just a 10-15 mile ride around the neighborhood, it's just gloves and a helmet and a hoodie. And the hoodie barely did anything to keep me warm, so I ended up cutting this ride short. I didn't go around my usual loop. I went around about a half of the loop. The normal loop's about 20 miles, half of the loop's about 10. That's enough to get the engine up to temperature. Here I am putting it back on its stand. So I keep all my bikes on stands stored upright. That seems to help a little bit. It also helps me cram more bikes into a smaller space. As you can see, I'm not working with the largest space, nor is it very well organized. That's a bit of a hoarder corner that you can see in the background there. Not all of that stuff is mine, and I'm working on getting rid of it here this season as it gets colder and I don't have anything better to do. So with that was a quick ride on my ZX7R. Thanks so much for watching. I get a kick out of it when you like and subscribe. Thanks for watching. Bye!